So, hi everybody, and thank you for joining me for this talk. So, essentially, whether we want to accept it or not, technology is really improving exponentially, and AI is here to stay. AI is an incredibly powerful tool, and if it's developed and deployed correctly, it could really be the best thing for society. I think what we really need to determine, or what we want to ascertain, is what side of AI do you want to be on? Do you want to be like Iron Man and use AI for saving the world? Or do you want to be a Decepticon and use AI to take over the human race? Let's talk about interviews and interview algorithm. How many of you have actually used an algorithm for an interview? Chances are you have, and you probably just didn't realize it. What you would do when in using your interview algorithm, what you would do to prep for an interview, if you take it as seriously as I do, is essentially you would research the company, you would consider who was successful hire in the past, and what made you prep your interview questions and answers, and possibly even consider what would be the best choice of clothes to wear, what would make you feel confident and empowered. And essentially, you would take all of this information and process it and determine what would be the best course of action. What you've actually done is created an algorithm. You've taken data, you've analyzed and processed that data, and then you've set a metric for success based on the data analytics. The only difference between what you would do or what you've done and what a computer would do is that you've done it manually in your mind, and a computer would simply automate that process. The thing about algorithms, though, is that what is a measure of success? Your metric for success, for winning at this interview, may not necessarily be the next person's measure or metric of success. And therein, ladies and gentlemen, lies our problem. According to Cathy O'Neil, who is the author of The Weapons of Math Destruction, algorithms are essentially opinions that are embedded in code. I'll say it again, an algorithm is an opinion embedded in code. Now, if this is true and an algorithm is in fact an opinion, doesn't it make it subjective? Does it make it fair? Is my opinion considered fair or fairer as opposed to your opinion? We know that algorithms are really ubiquitous in society, and they make determinations on really a plethora of things that affect us. And essentially, any creator of an algorithm, that could be me, that could be you, that could be Tanyika, our lovely host, any creator of an algorithm who creates a metric based on their opinion means that their opinion could be shaped by biases and prejudices and or even ulterior motives like financial incentives. So how do we know that someone's opinion is fair or objective? Let's take a look at some instances where opinions were not fair and objective, i.e. the algorithms, and they were actually biased against people in society. So in 2018, Amazon had built a hiring algorithm to determine applicants' success. The problem with Amazon's hiring algorithm was that it had been modeled on data sets used from applicants that had applied and were successful at Amazon. The problem with that was that all the people that had, or majority of the people that had applied and were successful were all men. So it goes without saying that Amazon's hiring algorithm was actually biased towards females. In 2016, ProPublica reported that Facebook had targeted certain advertisements to certain ethnic groups. Essentially, what Facebook's algorithm was doing was that it enabled an advertiser to target certain advertisements for housing only to white Americans, and thereby excluded African Americans, the Jewish community, and Latin American groups from seeing these housing ads. In 2018, Facebook again came under the spotlight because a whole lot of females had laid charges against Facebook for algorithmic discrimination. What they had said was that the algorithm had discriminated against them because they're females. In the charges, they cited up to 10 employers who had specifically used Facebook's algorithm to target ads, advertisements, or job postings specifically to men and exclude women or people of a non-binary gender. Apple, our good friends who make the lovely iPhone, had released their credit cards last year, and you'd see from the screen, they're really funky, cool, slick credit cards. And anyone who was anyone decided, hey, let me apply for an Apple credit card if it was available in your country. The problem with Apple, who had partnered with Goldman Sachs, the bank, for this credit card was that it was biased towards women. Again, Apple's algorithm had basically had the ability to grant men a higher credit limit than it granted women. Essentially, what the algorithm did was, even if the partners were married in community of property, as we know it in South Africa, or had joint income and expenses, the same bank account, had the exact same credit rating, the algorithm would allocate a credit limit that was up to 10 times higher for the man as opposed to his female partner. Spotify, the really lovely music platform, has an algorithm. It had discovered last year that their algorithm was biased towards female artists. So when you had a recommendation, the algorithm would automatically skew towards recommendations by male artists as opposed to female artists. Google, a study by Anupam Datta at the Carnegie Mellon University showed that the Google advertisements for jobs had actually targeted higher income jobs to male users as opposed to female users. And Optum, the health group, had created an algorithm which basically was biased towards African Americans. And essentially what Optum did was that it was an algorithm that's used by hospitals and insurance companies to determine whether chronically ill patients are able to get access to an advanced medical program and specialized care. The problem was that even though in a comparative study, African Americans and white Americans were compared, and the study showed that African American people actually needed more care, the algorithm denied them that ability to get that care, notwithstanding that they deserved it. I'm sure you guys all know about the Compass algorithm. It's been making huge waves in the past few years. And essentially what the Compass algorithm does is sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. So the Compass algorithm is basically a recidivism algorithm. And what that does is that it predicts whether somebody who was charged for an offense is actually likely to recommit that offense. And the judges use that risk rating to determine whether the person should get bail or not. Now, as you can see from this picture and from the data that's on the screen, in most instances, African Americans and Latin American people, both males and females, were prejudiced compared to their white American counterparts. And there was really no basis for that bias or that discrimination. It simply labeled African Americans and Latin Americans as a higher risk category. The software, Genderify, was actually developed, I think, sometime this year, maybe a month or two ago. And the software really only lasted 1 week. It was taken down. As you can see from the data on the screen, the software had actually perpetuated gender stereotypes by labeling someone who was a doctor more likely to be male, but a nurse more likely to be female. So really the question is, why are we accepting of this and why are we allowing this to continue? It's really not okay. As US Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, if we don't fix the bias, we are really automating this bias. And essentially, if I were an algorithm creator, I could basically be like Thanos. I could just snap my fingers and adversely affect large groups of people quickly and on a wider scale. So how do we actually fix this? We look at in developing algorithms, we need to look at how we can make the models more fair and more objective. And now there is honestly a plethora of information and research available to be able to produce fair and ethical algorithmic models. I have selected just a few key points that I feel is most relevant given the non-diversity and non-inclusivity in these algorithmic models that I've discussed. The first one is diverse data sets. Essentially, the data sets that are used to train the algorithms need to be more representative of the people who they're affecting. If an algorithm has underrepresentation of one group, it goes without saying, like the Amazon algorithm, hiring algorithm, that it's going to be biased towards a group of people. We need to also proactively detect hidden bias. Now, I'm aware that it is a misnomer of sorts, because if it's hidden, how do you detect it? But essentially, if you are testing an algorithm as a programmer, you would look at what outcomes are produced for different groups of people, and are there unequal outcomes? Is one group of people more prejudiced than another? And if so, why? And then fix it. The other element, which is really important, is reviewing proxies. Now, for those of you who don't know, a proxy is basically an online substitution for information. So essentially, what that means is that if I were filling out a credit application, I may not be allowed to be asked my race because that could be deemed unlawful. However, my area code could be a very good indicator of what race I am. My name could be a good indicator of what race I am. Similarly, in that context, data sets that are available online, things as innocuous as the kind of movies you watch, your online shopping habits, your social media groups, could be proxies for your gender, for your race, for where you live, or even whether you're pregnant or not. So it's really important to understand what these models are using and what innocuous information or proxies are being used to make determinations, thereby perpetuating biases. The last one would be auditable and explainable models, meaning that a model or an algorithm should be able to be audited by an independent party, of course, and explainable to anybody who seeks to understand how the model works. So essentially, there should be no black box models, i.e., we don't know what's going on. These two entities, Algorithm Watch and AIethicist.org, have an incredible collection, a global inventory of frameworks and guidelines and toolkits that you could use when actually looking at your models or your products and seeing how they may actually be more inclusive and more objective and more fair to all the parties concerned. One of the things I'd also like to say, and this is my personal opinion, is that we as consumers have a role to play in ensuring that we are able to detect and call out biases. And really the role of the consumer is to be more computer literate. To be more computer literate. And in this case, what consumers need to do is have AI literacy. If you understand how the models work and how computers work, you're able to call out those biases and test and challenge. So really what I'd like to say in conclusion is that we should be having a diversity by design approach to AI. And really, as I've listed here, is what is the model design? Are some groups worse off as a result of the model design, and why? Who benefits from this? And who's incentivized? Who is making money off these things, of the prejudices and the bias? And what level of diversity and fairness is required to ensure that the affected parties are represented? And really, what you need to do is take this feedback and adapt it to make sure that your models are diverse and objective. So if I could leave you with one final thought, really, the essence is, if AI is created by humans, for humans, and effected through machines, which machines are able to self-teach, should we then be improving human intelligence or artificial intelligence? Thank you so much. That is my talk, and I hope you found it interesting. You can find me on Twitter at Deshni_G or also on LinkedIn.